Alright guys, so I'm going to talk a little bit loud here. Working on a 2012 Vulcan Classic 900. I'm going to be changing out the clutch plates here. This bike has just shy of 20,000 on it. We get the traditional, put it in a higher gear at low RPMs, give it gas, the RPM shoots straight up, the bike goes nowhere. That is a very important test you want to do on these bikes before you buy it, because at that point the motor has more power ratio than the transmission, and it's going to cause those clutches to give up the ghost and start spinning and not driving the bike forward. The other telltale sign is you get out on the highway, you're doing about 60 miles an hour, you're in, I think it's fourth, and you're going to hear the bike rev up, and you're not going to see the bike start to move forward accordingly. Again, that's the clutch. Now, I'm doing a video, there's a couple out there, a few out there. The problem is, it's a good review on how to do the clutch, but not a complete how to do the clutch. They left out some key details, like buying O-rings for some of these water lines here, buying a new gasket for the back of this, things like that. How to take these assemblies off. You've got to take this crossbar off here, or down bar, whatever you want to call it, because I got to get to this cover right here. So I'm going to do a complete how to change your clutch, so that way anybody doing this can get into it, figure it out, bolt for bolt, nut for nut. Hopefully I don't miss anything. If I do, I apologize. Call me out on the comments so others can know, because it's hard to make video. I'm thinking at the same time I'm trying to speak, and sometimes that's harder than heck, especially when you're doing YouTube videos. You hear a lot of guys, they'll say a tire, they'll call it a rim, they'll say back brakes, they mean the front brakes. Just bear with them. This is tougher than people think. Now, if you're doing a voiceover, it's a lot easier because you're seeing what you're doing and doing a voiceover, but I like doing it live, so that way when I break stuff, you get to see it, you get to hear me curse, you see this is reality and what we're doing. So, again, I'm going to change the clutch and give you a full how-to on this video. Alright, so I got my tools laid out. I like doing that ahead of time. Let me move out of the front of the bar here. Got my tools lined up and what I think I'm going to need. Got a complete socket set on the left. I've got some Torx and Allens on the right. Adjustable wrench for the Bohemian sizes that doesn't fit any wrench. And also some pliers and a screwdriver. Got my toolbox here. This is my motorcycle toolbox. I keep it separate from my other tools. Things that are handy. Ratcheting wrenches, because I'm sure that'll be needed in here. Various things like that that I just keep aside for my motorcycle tools, so from my normal toolbox. Just like to get those all rock and roll and ready to roll here so we can get into tearing this bike down. I will try to remember to tell you what size tool you're going to need for what, and if there's a reverse thread, I'll mention that as well. I don't think there will be on this application, but we'll get started here soon. Hi, pretty busy day. I got some cicadas in the background singing to us. Cars passing. It's a live day. Great day to be working on this bike because I don't have to keep turning the fan off, the shop fan. It's going to be burning up. Here's first couple parts you're going to need. You're going to need EBC. I recommend EBC. I've always had good luck out of them. This is the SRK series kit. It comes with new steel plates, stiffer springs, things like that. If you don't get the EBC SRK version, then you're just going to get new friction plates. You're not going to get the steel rings that you want. I don't recommend putting this together with the old steel rings. They get burnt just the same. We have some 10W40 oil. This is going to be a full send blend that goes in. The clutch and the engine oil is shared. So we're going to change that again. Unfortunately, we changed this on the bike before the guy let me know the clutch was slipping, and his money, he had to buy all this again. We have some new year-round super coolant. That's going to go in there because in the front of this case is the water pump for the bike, so we're going to lose some coolant in this process. I will probably go ahead and flush it out for him while we're in the process. The other thing is the clutch plates, the new friction plates, have been soaking in oil for no less than 24 hours. That's going to get everything pre-primed and ready. You don't want to fire this bike up dry with those friction plates getting any more wear than they're supposed to. Now, on motorcycles, it's a wet clutch system. Yes, the pressure plates are in an oil bath. The reason is you're not driving as much power to the ground on this rear tire as you are a bike pushing all that weight. The other is it allows you to manipulate the clutch a lot more in turns and things like that, and a lot more forgiving to not burn that clutch up so quickly. So that's just some of the components you're going to need. I don't have the gasket. It is on the way. Unfortunately, I didn't catch that before the guy dropped the parts off, and I told him he had to get the gasket for it. The O-rings, the dealership didn't know where to get the O-rings. I'm assuming without taking this apart, the O-rings are right up in here. I'm going to take those apart. I have an O-ring kit here, so hopefully I can match that one for one. Some folks have had problems getting those pipes back in there, or those tubes back into this case for the water. They tear the O-rings up, things like that. Do not put it in dry. You want to put silicone on these. I recommend a silicone gel, and that way these O-rings slide into place. Do not use anything that has a chemical base to it, a gasoline base to it, because it will tear those gaskets up. They're not gasoline gaskets. They're not designed for gasoline. They're designed for water. So put those on there. You'll see me when I go to do it in the video, but that's how you keep from tearing the O-rings up. Now, this is in theory, because I haven't started doing this yet, so I may experience some problems myself. So we'll see what happens when we get in the video. All right, so first step that I chose to do, and I don't know if it's the right step, we're going to find out. I'm going to take this floorboard off that's going to contain this rear pump. Now, I got a screwdriver here with the yellow tip on it, some glue, or tape, so hopefully that'll let you know what's going on. Right below this floorboard on the front, there's going to be a 14 millimeter bolt. And then on the rear side, there's going to be another 14 millimeter. Keep in mind, the rear side is slightly shorter than the front side. So you take this off, don't mix these bolts up. I don't think it's going to be a big deal if you do, but don't mix them up. Again, if you can put it back in the right order, let's do it. So 14 millimeter front and back, that's going to make this whole assembly come off. There's going to be an 8 millimeter bolt right here underneath this cover that attaches this reservoir to the bike itself. Now, I plan to just drop this out of the way. I'm not going to disconnect the brakes and have to rebleed them, anything like that, if I can get away with it. If I can't, then, you know, it is what it is. You're going to have to refill the reservoir, get the airline bubbles out, things like that. So let's take it off, see what we're dealing with. I'm going to do my 8 millimeter first, just so that I know it's out of the way. And it's the least likely thing to give me problems once this thing starts to break free. All right, so screws are out. I will organize the screws offline without video. Tighten your cap up into the back. Just make sure it's nice and tight. You can remove this cover if you want, because you don't want that shit leaking all over. 14 millimeter in the back. Comes out. Again, I already did this. It's not the work of magic, so that's why everything's loosened up. 14 millimeter out of the front. I see that this one has some blue Loctite on it, which I like to see, especially on motorcycles. That is up out of the way. Now, there is a plug here with some wires on it. Don't screw that up. Don't pull those out. It's not a big deal if you do. You can repin it if you want. If you break the wire, you can solder it in. To me, it doesn't matter. I've soldered, repin things, so I'm okay. But I'm going to remove that switch as a whole, get it out of the way so I don't damage it, because I'm sure that's at least a $30 switch from the manufacturer. There is a brake line coming down here. Once I get this wire free from the switch, I'll be able to remove that unit and probably put it underneath the bike, get it out of the way. So I'm going to go to moving the switch. I'll give you some tips on that when I figure that one out. So far for the switch removal, I'm planning to remove this little spring back here on the lever plate of the brake. That's probably your brake light, tells you whether you're applying the brake or not. I'm going to remove that with a pair of needle nose to get that spring out of the way. Then there's two little nubs on that switch I'm going to compress, and then I'll just slide that switch out as a whole. That way I don't have to worry about reverse polarity on this and stuff like that or anything, but I'm going to get the switch out of the way next. Alright, switch wasn't too bad. Again, you're going to have two little tits here you have to compress to get that to come out. I did have another little safety tip down here towards the plunger itself, kind of hard to see, about right there. That got caught up a little bit. I had to get that out of the way. But the switch comes out, and that way we didn't break anything, we didn't tear anything up. There's your plunger switch. If your brake light's not working, good time to take that apart, test it, things like that. Sure you can disconnect it. Or if you need to adjust your brake lights, say somebody, hey, I don't see your brake lights, you know you're turning them on, but if you push them harder, they come on. you can adjust it at this right here, because this is a plastic nut for that. Now, since I'm working on this and I don't want to take that out of adjustment, I'm going to tape that up so that way I don't move the adjustment on it. Also, the back spring here that I disconnected, I'm going to tape it in place so I'm not doing the half-hour search later on trying to find out where the damn spring went. All right, so I'm going to just get my yellow tape, that way everybody can see it on the screen, hopefully. If I use black on black, you're never going to see it. So I'm just going to run a piece of tape around it. I'm also going to fold over an edge, make it real easy when I take it off because it's temporary. Don't start with the folded edge. I'm just going to put it around there just a little bit. You don't have to do this if you don't want, but you know what? I don't mind doing shit once, but I hate going back doing it twice. So that's out of the way now, so that's nice and secured. I'm not going to get that to remove to where I get that switch out of adjustment. And this other piece of tape, just going to go on the back side here. This is the spring that I removed, and you know, it's just going to fall off if I don't do anything with it. So I'm going to put a piece of tape on it, keep it from moving, falling off, so that way when I go to manhandle this thing, I don't have to worry about it. Alright, there it is. Again, that little spring's now taped into place, just like I thought. Tuck that bad boy out of the way. Now I can concentrate on, get that tucked up out of the way, getting this bar out. I'm probably gonna have to drop the exhaust next, it looks like, because you will have to drop the exhaust. Just since it's my first time, I may remove the breather just so I can get in there and look to see what I'm doing, and also to give everybody watching this video an opportunity to look. You may or may not need to do that. I've got a cool video on how to change the spark plugs without removing the gas tank on this, because I hate removing the gas tanks, especially this one. It's got some lines and petcock up there, and I don't want to deal with anything I don't have to. So let's see about getting that exhaust drop next. Alright, so I've been working on the exhaust and the shields. Zoom this out a little bit here. On a lot of exhaust, and this is going to depend on what exhaust you got, so I was debating either if I cover it, but I'm not going to assume everybody knows everything, because I didn't. There are some clamps back here, like I'm going to call them radiator hose clamps. They're back there. They just go on around the bike. The band goes around the hot exhaust, and then you screw it together. So that's what holds it together. You can see me pull this off. This has got generic ass clamps on it, which is very common on bikes. Even though this is a beautiful Cobra exhaust, they cheaped out on the clamps. I recommend, if you're going to do this to your bike and you're going to have clamps holding these heat shields on, go out and buy some for a pool and get the stainless steel version, because then you won't have the issue that I was struggling with a little bit with rust. Now, one tool I didn't mention, you're going to see that I have a torque wrench. I like using this thing because I just hate turning screws. I've got a wobble extension and more traditional if I had to get in there, and an adapter, because these are 8mm bolts on the back of those clamps. The other thing that's a pretty cool tool is this right here. Fits into your torque driver and allows you a right angle so you can get into tighter spaces. That's a really cool tool, well worth the money buying from DeWalt for that. I use it for a lot of household projects, but for tools or this type of project as well. So we're going to see about removing these. Going to be a little different because it's got some black tips on the back, so I'm going to figure that out. But you can see now these heat shields are loose. It's going to allow me to get to the bolts on the head to get the exhaust off. The other thing by removing the heat shields is I can set them out of the way. Got a friendly bee here. Going to set those out of the way. Don't scrape the chromes up. That's key. If it's your bike, you're going to take pride. If it's somebody else's bike, take even more pride, because they're not going to be happy when you come back and you scratch the shit out of their stuff. So I'm going to work on figuring out how to get these exhausts off, because I'm pretty certain those black tips back there are going to have to come off some way or another to get this exhaust off. So I'm going to work on that next. Worth mentioning, because I forgot, there was a foot peg right here. I took it out of the way again. You may not have to, but I had a clamp right on top here I had to remove. So I just removed that foot peg, put it underneath. It's just two 10mm bolts. I'm not going to review that in the video. You got a top bottom bolt, take it out, move it, set it aside so you can see what you're doing and getting into what you need to get into. Alright, so on the back side of that exhaust, those black tips do have to come off. For me, it's an 11mm bolt. I'm going to get those off, but if you have the tips on yours, check that. Don't assume it's all force, guts, and and sweat and tears to get this stuff apart. 9 out of 10 times you have to force anything on a bike, car, vehicle, anything, you're doing something wrong. Something's not loosened or something to that effect. Not a lot should take a lot of force unless it's rusted in place. Here's a full setup just to show people. You can see that spinning. That's going to help me because I'm going to be able to get in between that brake disc and the exhaust, break those bolts free using this little doodad here, this right angle. As you can see, it allows you to move this in any direction. You can put extensions in between here if you had to. You can put extensions in between there, wobbles, whatever you need to do. So that's going to be the tool that I use next to break this apart. These are the tips I'm talking about. Come back, just finish the exhaust. Good time to clean them up if you're the bike owner and want to do it. I'm not the bike owner, so I'm putting it back the way it is. They can take it apart to clean their own bike instead of paying me. 11 millimeter bolt to take that off, real simple, fit like that. Allows you probably to adjust it any way you want. These are a cut off like that. But that gets those off there. You see I put the bolt back in. I also put these bolts back in here that held that brake assembly on. Reason I do that, I don't screw up. I don't try to find a bolt that's missing. I don't have to worry about bolts going in the right order, because when we start to take this cover off, you're going to see those, each one of those bolts can be a different size. There's going to be a couple bolts of different size because they're that way on bikes, depending on how far they're going into the engine, things like that. So now we're ready for the exhaust shields. I believe this one's just going to pop off the front somehow. It doesn't mean it's easy. I feel I got another clamp back there. No big deal. But it's just going to pry off and slide down, and as you pry off, that's going to take that shield off. Treat this when you got it off. Might as well. Any rust you see on this bike, take care of it. Bike's ridden in the rain, it's going to have rust. There's no way to prevent that. Every bolt, shit like that. I don't use chrome bolts on my bike anymore. I use stainless steel for that reason. Clean this rust up, treat it. Fluid film is a great spray for that because you don't have to get through the rust, take it off. It will absorb into the rust and stop the rust, and it hangs around. It's good shit. These are the clamps that I was talking about. I'm not going to mess with doing this because the owner's not going to pay me to do it, but I would replace these with stainless steel clamps. I'm going to recommend he does that at a later date on his own dime because it doesn't look fun to do on this exhaust. So I'm going to set this aside, get that other clamp taken out of the way. You can also see where your clamps were, so you know you get them in the right position, lined up. Clean this up. It was probably chrome at one time. Everybody knows that any chrome you buy, it will glue. I don't care what that manufacturer says, especially if you're hopping these bikes up and you're putting more fuel, less air, or less air, more fuel. You're tuning it, you're doing things, changing the breather around, shit like that. You're going to have that bike that turns blue. That's why they put those shields on there. Not only to protect your leg, it's not going to keep your leg from frying. It's still going to be at a level of flash frying an egg. It's just not going to melt to the bone before you have a chance to move it off of there, because that shit gets hot, guys. That's probably, I'm estimating 12 to 1500 degrees coming off that pipe. My son got burned on my Harley. He hasn't been on the Harley since, and that was almost 8 years ago. He slid off the bike instead of doing what I said by lifting one leg over and moving it over, things like that. Now, when I go to remove this exhaust, obviously I'm going to do these 4 bolts, 2 per side. There's also a nice clamp back here with nothing else attached. I'm going to remove that clamp, or not that clamp, I'm sorry, that brace. See, YouTube videos are hard to make. I'm going to remove that entire brace. I'm not going to screw with taking these pipes off separately unless I have to for adjustment reasons. And the reason I'm not is I'll be able to bolt that right back in, that plate, mount plate, and it will keep these pipes in the position I need to go ahead and run those screws, those bolts back up into the heads to tighten them up. So that's what I'm going to leave that in place. I'll show you that when we get to it. That's the money shot right there, guys. That's what you pay for when it comes to exhaust. It's a Cobra exhaust. It looks ugly because it's blued, but I've seen people that leave just that. They don't put their chromes on them. They like this look. It's a rugged look. It's not a bad look. You can wrap those if you want to help keep the heat inside the pipes, go out of the pipes. I don't do that because I think it just retains heat more than it allows heat to just escape and naturally breathe through the side as you're going down the road. So the next thing I'm going to do, go ahead and loosen 2 bolts here at the head, 2 bolts here at the head. Then I will remove that clamp in the back about midway down right before you get into the baffles. So that way, again, it keeps the exhaust completely intact and I don't have to move much around. Y'all getting a special treat today, seeing my big ass belly in the way. 2 bolts in the back, 1 right here, 1 in behind the exhaust. I have a ratcheting wrench. This is 12 millimeter bolts back here. For this particular exhaust, it is 12 millimeter bolts up here, actually nuts up there because they're in studs. Get that ratchet, man, you're gonna need it because it makes your life hell or easier when things are hell. Now, when I go to remove these exhaust head bolts, I don't use a torque wrench, and the reason I don't use a torque wrench, impact, or air driver or electric driver is I don't want to put those studs under too much stress so quick, because this is just an opinion thing, but I think just that initial shock of that much power can actually snap those off versus trying to go at it a little bit slow. Now you can tell there's that difference between, oh my God, holy shit, and a bolt breaking loose. If it's not breaking loose, put some penetrating oil on that. Now that they're broken loose, I can go through, use my torque driver where I can, switch them over now, and I can get into each one of these head bolts, take them off. They're just actually nuts. They'll come off, they're the same size. No biggie here, no surprise. That'll loosen that plate up. There's a donut ring underneath there. Replace that donut ring each and every time. You take an exhaust off so you don't get an exhaust leak. Not that it doesn't make your bike sound cool or bad or anything like that. It's just a matter of the less exhaust leaks, the better. So that's going to loosen this plate up. I can pull that plate back a little bit. Exhaust will be free. Get that plate out of the way off of those studs. Do not try to pull the plate and stud in place. Loosen them up to where they're loose. Now I can go through, do my 12 millimeter here. See how that works? Makes life a hell of a lot better, buddy. Turning wrenches and flipping them and taking them off and all that shit, that's a problem. Got red Loctite on it, so this is aftermarket exhaust. I would expect to see that. Actually, if I don't see Loctite, I have a problem with it. So that's getting loose. Now I'm going to hold the exhaust up a little bit, take this last bolt out. Voila. A little bit of finagling, plate reattached, exhaust is out. I'm going to set this bad boy aside because it's expensive. No exhaust is cheap. You can see how this came out in one piece. That bracket in the back, I don't have to do any adjustments, anything like that. And I can save myself a hell of a lot of time trying to line these pipes up by myself. We start to see what we're getting into here. You can see why I have to remove this body section or this frame section. I'm going to support it right here because this thing's tied together. Some people do, some people don't. I don't want to put too much stress on the top half of the frame. You can see in here, there's the donut, little O-rings that go in there. They're compression one-time use. So make sure you replace those each and every time or you're going to get an exhaust leak. Not bad if you do. You can see the exhaust pretty simple to take off. Of course, you got to take this floorboard off. Next, I'm going to remove this outer piece here, anything connected to it, and then I'll get into these bolts here. You'll probably see this off in the process because I'm just going to get out of the way so you guys can see what's going on. Give you a better view of what I'm doing because cameras, you can't see everything like I can. All right, so 4 bolts. Take this out, not a big deal. Probably about a 6 millimeter is what you actually need. Close is a 5/32 to get that off. When you take any bolt off, as you can see what I'm doing, I take a bolt off, I look, I compare, make sure they're the same size so I don't have an issue. I see that there are little washers on there, so I'll get that back into place, things like that. It's also a good time to get in here and check anybody's breather, make sure it's in good condition. It's got oil in the bottom. It's not a concern, all bikes do it. And how they do it is right here. I can see they draw the fumes off the heads and they dump it back into the oil filter so that way it can be burned through the motor and do that. Now on a bike, EPA people come out, yell at me, comment, don't care. I plug that shit off. I just vapor this into the environment. I use a K&N air filter. It gets full of oil, then I clean that, get rid of the oil, things like that, and put it back into play. I don't cycle that air back down in my motor, and 2 reasons why is you get the oil film that always comes here. That'll eat your breather up. Any plastic in here, rubber, it'll eat that rubber up as well. It also can get your breather dirty. Okay, so more than 2. But I don't like pulling that shit back into my engine because it's only getting the carburetors dirty, things like that. They've been doing that since years ago. I got a 70 Monte Carlo to the left. They've been doing it as well. So, you know, like I said, if you're a tree hugger, yell at me if you want, but that's what I do. I'm going to get these bolts out next so I can remove this plate, see what I'm dealing with in the back, and go from there. Alright, to remove this center plate, same exact size up here. What was it, 5/32, 6 millimeter. Strangely, man, I don't know why, but this bike, and this scares the shit out of me. 2 bolts has dropped out of this breather, and I didn't take them off. One of them came out. I'm assuming they go in right here, but they probably didn't tighten them up. So you're gonna have 2 bolts that have to come loose back here to get this plate off, and I'm not sure about these 6 bolts yet. It may just be for these rubber intake hoses. But that fell out, man. That's scary as hell. You don't want that. It's, you know, because it's technically not going to pull it up through the bike into the motor, things like that. But those bolts were just floating around in there. That's the stupid shit you see when you buy a used bike, folks. Don't guarantee that people put it back together. The other is, and I tell people, just because you paid somebody to do it, doesn't mean they're doing it right, and it doesn't mean they know what the hell they're doing. So those bolts are loose in there, and I don't like seeing that. So you didn't get to see me take them out, because I didn't take them out, but you're going to see me put them back in. Alright, so 6 bolts are all the same, came out of this, makes it real nice and wobbly. From what I can tell, I have a line that comes in the back here that I'm going to have to unclamp. Just squeeze the clamp down if you got the tool. God bless you, you bought it. I didn't. I use channel locks, wire pliers. There's also a sensor right here. You're going to disconnect that. So make sure you get all that stuff disconnected before your manhand will pull this damn thing off. The inner plate, here it is. It's out. There's a bolt in the center here. Again, I'm a fan of putting bolts back in. Now this is to where it won't fall out. Yeah, so we'll get those hoses disconnected. I'll show that in the picture as well so you guys can see what's going on with that. Now you're taking hoses off. What I am not a fan of doing is taking a screwdriver, prying that thing off and getting underneath it. You damage your hose. Again, you're trying not to spend money here. You don't have to. The way I do it is I take usually a pair of channel locks. You can use these as well. But I'm gonna, and the reason I use channel locks, especially my old ones, is they just don't have much teeth left in them, so it doesn't dig into that rubber. And I grab there, and I just push or twist the hose around as it comes off. Now I don't want to dig into it and ruin the hose, and then that clamp can't seal correctly, and then I got to go back buy a new hose. Again, I'm not into spending money. I don't have to. I don't want anybody else to spend the money. They don't have to. There's a clip on this as well, right on the top. Little push down, little pull action, comes right out. The hose on the bottom I haven't figured out yet because it doesn't look like it's got a clamp on it. So again, I'm going to use my channel locks, wiggle that hose off. It's probably just compression fitting, and it's an air line of some type to pull air. But I don't want to pull that because I don't want to pull it in between these heads because God knows where it goes to, and I don't want to have to make that connection later. I'm American. I got fat fingers, and you just can't get into some of the tight spaces that these manufacturers can when they build them. So I'm going to work on getting that hose off. I will tell you how that happens. Alright, so this hose wasn't too bad. You got a clamp here, you can't get to it, it's impossible. So they probably clamped it off. It does go to the back of the front cylinder, so yeah, that's going to be a bitch to get into if you pull it off, but not the end of the world. But take that off. All I did is it's a soft hose. I just gently clamped onto it, pulled it off. Again, you're talking about air going through this, so it's no big deal. There is an adjustment here. I'm assuming that's for idle. So that adjustment there, it kind of clips into right here on your air breather. That's the front right there. Gently work that up to get it off. So if you feel a little bit of resistance, that's what that is. Goes directly to the carburetor for adjustments. I will put these plates back together and get this all to where the bolts don't get lost. Yeah, you can see where that bolt would have been on this side. That would have gone through those 2 spots right there. So not a big deal, but I don't like it. They're there for a reason, to keep the breather from moving. It's probably because they didn't put Loctite on this. Whenever you put any bolt back into a bike, use Loctite. Do not use the permanent Loctite. That's a red. Some of the colors change. I use a blue Loctite because that's a medium grade. You can still get that bolt off. Doesn't mean you won't ever use red, but I don't recommend it if you think you're going to take the bike back apart. So here's a line right here. I believe this to be a water line, compression fit coming in. It's a bear to get on and off. There's a little lip you can work with. I try not to get into the lip because I don't want to damage this hose at all, because I don't know if it's plastic, I don't know if it's metal yet. There's going to be the one in front, all of that. Here's your clutch cable coming down. So I'm almost to the point to where I got enough stuff off I could be dangerous. I'm going to work on getting this piece off here. While I'm doing that, I'm going to go ahead and drain the oil, get it drained out of the bike because the back half of this has got a lot of oil in it. Get that out, and then I'll work on draining the radiator fluid, and I'll tell you how to do that as well. Don't take this cover off before you do that. Here's the plug that you had to unclamp from the top, wiggle off. Here's where it goes to your carburetor. Here's one airline, second airline. This is just chopped off. It's just there for no reason. Got a vent in the back. That's where it's getting most of your air coming in. I don't recommend that because it's drawing all the heat from this. It's for cold starts, whereas your air coming into this box that I can see, pretty much there's a hole right there, but coming from the heat of that engine. You're getting a lot of hot gases into your motor, giving you less performance, so upgrade your breather when you can. They'll call it a stage 1, 2, 10, whatever you want to call it. There are no official stage numbers, and I tell people, oh, I got a stage 3 kit. I don't know somebody that sells one that says stage 3 kit officiated by the manufacturer, because that don't happen. I just consider a stage 1 as mild changes, breather, exhaust, tune, you have to tune it, and then you get into stage 2. That's a few more, but there's no delineation when you do it. I think stage 1 is bolt-ons, stage 2 is recamming, stage 3 you're getting into the piston heads because you're changing the compression at that point. So, but that's what I talk about, stages and levels like a tuner, things like that. So we're going to get to draining the oil, and I'll show you that next. Alright, so draining oil is real easy. 17 millimeter bolt right in the center here does have a crush washer. Up to you if you replace it or not. You got leaks, you have to replace it. Guess what? You got to buy new oil. So what does that mean? Replace that crush washer. It looks like a just a gasket, or not a gasket, but a steel washer to me. But everybody's calling it a crush washer. No big deal. Buy a new one. It's probably less than $1. So I'm going to pull that drain plug, get it out of the way so it can start draining. Now when I go to change the oil, and I'm not going to do an oil change video because that's pretty simple, everybody's got it, you're going to remove a little cover here in front. I believe that to be a 10 millimeter 2 bolts. Get that out of the way, and you have your oil filter in there. The oil filters can be tough. The person before us hand tightened it, cranked it down a couple ugga-duggas, got really swelled to the engine, so we struggled to get it off. We only hand tighten it, quarter turn, you're good. Or tighten it, see no leaks, you're good. You see leaks, tighten a little more. It's got a rubber seal on there. We all know about that, man. I'm not going to rehash that. If you need to know how to do that, an oil change, there's other videos to watch for that. I'll just leave it at that. So, gonna drain the oil, get that going, and then get the oil out of the bike, and then start on the radiator. It's a shame this bike has less than 100 miles on this oil. It's been drained out of it. I bought a Harley Davidson oil pan. You don't have to buy HD. You can buy anything you want. My bike happens to be a Harley. So yeah, I'm fixing it a hell of a lot more than I'm fixing other bikes that I own. Oil's draining out, gonna let that go. Whenever you're taking the oil plug out on any vehicle, anything that runs needs oil, you're gonna loosen it, then you're gonna start loosening it by your fingers because it'll be that loose. Push up on it when you do. This tip will retain most of that oil in there so it doesn't go all over your hands. Then when you feel it clicking, you know you've unscrewed it as much as you can. Grab it, just pull that thing right out of the way. You're going to get minimal spill on you, your hands, things like that. This is the washer they talk about. It's still up there, so I'm going to wait for the oil to change. Again, it looks like a steel washer to me, but the guy was adamant that it was a crush washer, wanted me to put one on. Last oil change, he bought a new one this time. I'm going to do as he says, because I'm not buying $30 worth of oil for this bike if it doesn't work. So oil's draining. We're going to let it drain out relatively good since it's a thicker viscosity while I move some of the sidebar right here, get it out of the way, so we're not dealing with as much oil as possible. The water, that's a different story, man. Water drains pretty quick, the radiator fluid. So we'll get to the side piece here. So oil's doing its thing here. Tube for your soft rubber tube. There's an interconnect here, kind of strange. But they do that unless this tube is just protector is what it is actually. around the brake line. Sorry, the hydro brake line. There's clamps on here, 3 clamps. You're gonna take a screwdriver back in there, snap them up, don't break them. Come out. It's gonna allow you to disconnect this line completely from that rail. Even gives you more space. Put that bad boy out of the way, tuck it out of the way. Beautiful thing. Man, the engineer nailed that one. Didn't nail everything. They nailed that one. He or she. Man, I like to get that other clamp out of there so I can just move it out of the way, which there we go. It's clamped. The reason I did that because I can move them up out of these bolts right here to get to it. You can see all my bolts are back in place. Here's a point, guys. Don't freaking start your bike without an exhaust on it. Some people think it's the coolest thing in the world. Oh my God, it's going to sound loud as hell. It's going to go blow the carbon out. Yeah, it'll do that. But you have a thing what's called intake. That piston can draw air back in through the exhaust. Now, I'm not saying it happens harmoniously and designed to do that, but the problem when that happens, you're pulling in cold air into your cylinders. What do you think that's going to do to your valve or could do to your valve? It could bend that valve. Now, I've never tested that. I've never tried that. People told me. That's one of those things that just took them at the word. I don't believe everything I hear, but that's one I'm not willing to test and put through time and see whether those people were right or not. Oil is about done draining here. I'm going to recover this washer. It's real simple. I'll show you what the washer looks like. You can see they say that is a crush washer. I think they're wrong. It's just a steel washer. Maybe it's an aluminum washer, and that's what they're saying. It's a crush washer. If you have to reuse it, flip it around. It's no different than doing brake lines on a car, in my opinion. Although, don't trust your brake lines doing that. I can see some ridges in there where it cut in there, so maybe it is a crush washer. Don't know. But the guy bought it. I'm going to put a new one in. Alright, so to take this member off, you're going to need an 8mm. It's going to get 2 bolts. You got 2 bolts here, up top. 1, 2, back here, 3, 4. On the side, you're also going to have one that helps hold the radiator in. 8mm, I believe. Shit, my eyes are going bad. Yeah, I think it's an 8mm. You'll figure it out. 8mm. I'm going to take this one off first. Just make sure I get nothing connected to that piece when I go to take it off. Then I'm going to switch over. What you see me doing is these are little adapters right here. If you don't have them, go buy them. They're worth their weight in gold when it comes to doing things to your bike, your cars, anything like that at all. I do see another nut here. Looks like a cross member going to the back I'm going to have to take off. So I'm going to drop 2 of these now. Checking them, make sure they're the same size. Loosen that one. Loosen that one. Get in here. Looks to be about a 15mm or a 12, maybe a 13, 14. 13 is usually a popular size. I've seen 14 being used on this bike a lot. Yeah, 14mm. Just gonna get that off. Let's see, definitely a 14. So we can get this bolt off. It's off. Get it out of the way. See if there's anything else. Some bolts right here to this bracket. Longer bolt. Doesn't have enough ass to do it. Looks like that's the same bolt. Look at that. Looks like it's loose. It's going to give me what I need it to be. Take it off. Make sure they're the same as the other 2 that I took off. Get the right socket here. Hold that so that doesn't happen to you. But that is the tube that we have to take out of the way. It gives us access to everything on this side. I'm going to move to draining the water, let it go, and then I'll start pulling that cover off, see what kind of mess I'm going to get in. I'm talking a little louder here. I have music in the background to get bored, guys. There's a cover here that I'm going to take off now. It's just a compression on the bottom. There's a screw here, Phillips tip screw you're going to get out. It just kind of floated in there, so I'm going to leave it in there. Screws into that, so that's how it happens. Again, you got compression. Somebody's already taken this off. Just snap this bad boy off, not knowing any different. But 2 compression fittings, goes in some holes, stays in there. Phillips on the top, going to take that off. Store it like this, not like that. It'll scratch paint up. I'm just going to take this cap off. I don't know if you need to do this or not, but my idea behind it and why I'm doing it, this is the overflow fill for the fluid, the radiator fluid, is when I disconnect that hose, I want to make sure I have nothing restricting it from getting all the water out of it. Now you got to be careful because you're also going to have to burp this system so you don't get vapor lock in there. Because if you get an air bubble and that air pump's trying to just spin on dry air, guess what? It's not going to pump fluid. So the other means is right here in front. I see there is a clamp there that I can disconnect that radiator hose and flush it out as well. Again, to get as much fluid out of this bike as possible for less mess when I go to take care of the clutch. All right, so you know what? Worth mentioning, I took the oil out of it. Keys, I'm going to throw over by my oil boxes or my oil bottles. And why? You don't want to get ahead of yourself, especially making a damn YouTube video and you're trying to explain more than you're following procedures. You start this bike without oil in it. So I'm going to put the keys over by the oil. That's worth noting in this while we're at this stage so nobody makes a mistake down the road. Now I used all right, so I'm getting ready to drain this fluid. I'm using a Folgers can. I hope I don't have a lot of fluid in this. I'm assuming the bike doesn't hold that much. If it does, you're going to get to see the shit show. 7mm socket, reverse. Put it on there, loosen up that clamp, get it up out of the way. Go slow, make sure you have variable speed. It's already starting to leak some fluid. I am not reusing this fluid. You can, you can't. You want to save it, strain it, do whatever you want to do. I'm going to send it off for recycling. I don't use screwdrivers on those worm type clamps because you just booger it up. It's a pain in the ass. I'm going to twist the clamp, get it out of the way. Give that hose a nice spin. Fluid's looking good, actually. Quite impressed with it. So, but I'm going to go ahead and drain the fluid and get this out of the bike so we can go from there. All right, so I drained the fluid out, wasn't too bad. Disconnected the upper hose clamp here coming out of the bottom of the radiator and going into this cover where the pump is at. Did not overflow a full 50, almost 51 ounce Folgers can, so you're good there. It's perfect size, it fits underneath. I did disconnect the top radiator hose on the other side that I showed you earlier. Had zero effect on the bike, so save you the trouble, don't do it. Doesn't help, because by opening that reservoir up, I allow gravity to do what it does best and pulls everything down to the ground. So we're good there. I'm going to get the brake or the clutch lever or cable out of the way. I'm going to loosen all the tension up here on the other side. You know, you got the little tension here. I'm going to loosen that up on the other side. There's also a tensioner right here. I'm going to loosen that up all the way. So that way I've got as much free play into that cable as possible, because you got to back it out and get it out of this clamp, and then it disconnects on a little lever there. So that's next. Man, we're almost there to seeing what the clutch looks like. Alright, I hope that I don't block here. This is the clutch cable that I was talking about. It's got a jam nut on it. You're going to need two 12-inch wrenches. Any good mechanic will tell you have a second set of wrenches, sometimes 3. Same size, so you need 2 wrenches, 12 and 12. You're going to loosen this jam nut up, spin it all the way down. When you do that, that's going to loosen this top big nut up, and you're going to pull these sleeves down, these little rubber sleeves down there just to protect it. You're going to drive the 2 outer nuts together. What that's going to do is put as much slack into that cable as possible, so that way I have as much room to work here and I'm not fighting anything under tension. You don't want to lose fingers with anything being under tension, spring tension, anything like that at all. So I'll show you how I adjust the other part here in just a second. It's funny, I say you'll see things in just a second. This is what I'm talking about. I'm going to get my channel locks here, loosen this nut up, get a good grip on it, don't round the damn thing off. Run it all the way out, and then you're just going to run this bolt all the way in towards the clutch lever itself. Now you can see that clutch is loose as heck. If you wanted to, you could really pull this out and you could weasel it through there. That's how you get your clutch cable off of this in case you ever have to replace the clutch cable. So now you can see that clutch is under zero tension at all. We're going to move to the next phase and start taking that plate off. So you heard me call this a plate. It's actually a cover. Clutch cable doesn't look too bad. It looks like another adjustment here that could be made. It is not a 12. I highly doubt it's a 10, and I don't know 11, so 12 is going to work. You got a jam nut on the back side for the drivers. You're going to take that completely out. And again, that's if you needed to adjust it, because that's just to secure this whole assembly in place. But I'm going to pull it out, and actually take this nut all the way off, and there's a reason for that, because now I can pull this whole clutch assembly forward, and I can remove it. There's a little tip that this is caught into here. Looks like it's just going to take a little bit of force to get that out, but that'll allow me to remove this entire clutch cable just to get it out of the way. I don't want to fight anything. I'm not about removing anything you don't have to, so I'll tell you if there's an advantage or a disadvantage to doing that. Alright, so to get this clutch cable out, not too bad. It's just knowing how to do it. Once you figure it out, it's easy. I did disconnect it from the lever itself. That gave me enough ability to pull this clutch cable out of this channel. Then what you do is you rotate this little plate all the way around like that. If you can see right here, this bottom lever and this little pivoting plate here or catch. If you put it all the way forward, it allows you enough room to go in and push that clutch cable forward to get past this little tit, and that will get the clutch up out of the way. I'm just going to tuck it up out of the way. Now my clutch is unassembled. I'm ready to get in and start removing this. So this right here, I'm not sure how I'm going to deal with this tube going into the cylinder heads. We'll figure that out. But I'm going to go ahead and get all the bolts loosened up. Look like there's one cable going here. Don't know what that is. If that's the starter, I think, or something. But you know, there's just some small clamps here. You just bend them out of the way. Get that up out of the way so you can get it done. I'm going to force it down below the bike so that it's done out of the way. There's another little clamp right here. Again, just a little bit of finagling, gets it up out of the way. Tuck it up underneath the bike. Now it runs along the bottom of the bike. Gives you full access to this cover here. Now, good time to get your shit organized, get your tools out of the way, line things up, push them aside. I typically start putting the sockets back in their place, wrenching to one side. I'm going to put a towel down because this fluid gets everywhere. It's a pain in the ass. I think it's worse than oil, the radiator fluid I mean. But I will probably go ahead and put my oil pan back underneath here when I go to loosen this up. Bunch of bolts. Starting from top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 in the middle, 14 in the middle. There's one below here. I don't know what that's for. Maybe that's a water drain. So I'll test that to see if it's a water drain. It's a little bolt right there. So let's get into that and see what that brings us. Looks to be about a 10 millimeter. I'm gonna move my bucket back here. Slide it up underneath there. Ratcheting, love it. Take that bolt out. Again, I'm going to drive it all the way up, push pressure on it, going into the engine as I take it apart. So stuff doesn't puke all over me, but we're going to see what comes out of here. I'm hoping water comes out of here is what I'm hoping. I think it will, but I don't have a manual on this. YouTube's the new manual. You're ASC certified once you go on YouTube. Yeah, a little bit of water came out of there, little plug, so if you need to drain that part, you can. Probably to test to see if your water pump's even flowing through there. You could loosen that up if it spews water everywhere, your water pump's going. I'm going to clean that off, put it back in so I don't lose it, and next thing you know, we're going to get these bolts out. I'll tell you the size of that in just a little bit. Here's my diagram. Just drafted this up on CAD. Full scale, everything's to scale as you can see. Beautiful artwork, I'll sell that later. Front of the bike, rear of the bike, clutch coming into the round derby looking cover, tube to the front, tube to the top, tells you where all your bolts are at. I'm going to poke a Phillips tip screwdriver through here as I take them off. I'm going to drop each bolt into there, and I don't use a big Phillips because I want it to be tight when it goes in the cardboard in case I drop the damn thing. But that's what we do to keep our bolts in order because they are different sizes. Ah, that's beautiful. Look at that. All my bolts are lined up, marked with the tube. No guessing where anything is going to go when I go to put it back together. Pushed them all the way. Most of the bolts are the same, except for these bottom two. So you could have marked those if you wanted, but you know what? Hey, it's simple. Plus, I ain't losing the damn screws. Straps on there. Worth its weight in gold. That I don't have to go back and do anything from memory. If you do, or you get confused, do a disassembly on your bike. You don't have to talk like I do, but take notes. Put it in a video. So worst case scenario, you can go back and say, oh man, what did I do? You can take it off, say, hey, look at the size of this bolt. Left turn to tighten, right turn to tighten, things like that. Make your own videos if you have to when you're working on your bike, because it may save you down the road. I've done it for cars. We're ready to rock and roll here and pull this cover off. I've got my spent or used motor oil already out of my container here. This is a pan made by Harley Davidson. I'm sure they make them elsewhere. Cap in the center, you got a vent hole off to the corner, and you got a pour right here. So I'm going to gently just try to rock this thing back and forth. I may have to use a rubber mallet to get it off. I'll tell you what I did. Taking into account not to bend this center tube going to the bottom of the cylinders for the water. Make sure that there's no missing screws that I forgot to take out, bolts, anything like that. Looks like it's all free. May require a dead blow hammer. Dead blow is it doesn't bounce back, and you get a lot less chance of cracking something, especially a cover if you're using a dead blow. But I don't know what I'm going to get into. I'll tell you what it took to get this off safely here when I do. All right, so the easiest way I found is you got to be careful. Again, don't scratch shit up, don't break shit. But I took a very quality hammer with some good teeth on it there. There's a little lip on this corner here. I put it up against the header bolt. Again, not a lot of pressure, but it just popped off. It broke that seal, allowed me to get into what I needed to do. Didn't have to hammer anything. Sometimes with heat, those just get stuck on. As you can see, a little bit of fluid coming out, not much. I'm gonna have to deal with this hose right here. I don't know what's best, if it's best to come out of the motor part or out of this part. We'll see. Just popped out of the motor part. Looks like some seals there. Give you a good idea what it is. Dealership said those O-rings aren't available. It may be they have to buy this whole tube. A lot of people complain that these leak when they're done. Put some silicone on them. I think what people are doing is they're busting these up, rolling them and things like that when they're trying to put it back together, and it's not giving a good seal. If you do have leaking and you can't get these rings, by all means you can use the orange copper if you had to. Some cars are going back to that. They're not using the traditional gaskets like thermostats and things like that because they just don't seal that well. Whereas you can get some sealant that would do this. The copper ATV, I think they call it, for that. If you absolutely have to. If you don't do it. But my ring inside there is good. I'll be using silicone to put it back together. This plate is ready to come off. Looks like it just wiggles off. Gasket. Do not reuse the gasket. Get a new gasket. Some of the videos I saw made no mention of that gasket at all. Here's where everything is. Your water pump's right here. Looks to be in good shape. Here's your clutch basket. I'm going to take these screws off, take this plate off, see what all those look like. I hope I remember to tell you when you see me taking this thing off, I am going to be pulling this off and laying it down just like this. Plate coming off down, plate coming off down. That way I can inspect my new plates to make sure there's not a plate that is different from the rest and has to go on in a different order or line up. Also, watch how these teeth are, because I don't know yet, and I'm going to see to make sure that we're not alternating slots and all these teeth going back and forth between the friction plates and the clutches. I'll figure all that out. You'll see me talking about it on videos. I take it off. This appears to be your main crank. Yeah, actually, yeah. So this, I don't know, we don't have a manual. Could be the main crank. This is your transmission. This is just an idler gear that goes in between for probably gear reduction. Starter down here. There is a big washer on that. Take it off. Look at your starter. Make sure your teeth are in good shape. Nothing is goofed up. You have no debris down here, no teeth that are chipped or worn, or a teeth is a gear's not aligned, things like that. If you have to replace your impeller or your water pump, it's probably just a bolt here to replace that. But you see what you can get into? That was a drain down in the bottom because it has fluid down there. Clean this up, inspect this. Here's where your clutch comes in. I don't know how this is going to line up. It may be a little tricky for me. Somehow that lines up. Yeah, so it lines up. There's a little tooth on it. It's hard to see. There's a tooth here. Where the hell's my pointer screwdriver? Made it for you guys. Now, oh, here we go. There is a slot on here, how it rotates, and it grabs onto this pole here, and that's what pushes your clutch in and out when you're doing it. Probably pulls it out and in, things like that. So you got to get all that lined up when you put it back in. Hopefully I'll cover it in detail as we do it. But I mention it now in case I forget, because sometimes these videos are hard to make when you're trying to say things out loud versus just going in and thinking in your mind, did I get this, did I get that? So we're going to get to pulling that clutch basket apart here momentarily. Alright, so we're going to get this clutch basket apart. It is a 10mm socket. I used a regular socket wrench to break them free. Put them on there, just tap them lightly, they'll break free. I'm going to remove them slowly because it is under a spring load and a star configuration. So back it up slowly and just rotate. Don't know if you need to do this, but I treat it like a tire. Each time, coming out a little more until we loosen everything up on these springs. And eventually, the springs will be loose. I think we're there. So I can go through and just loosen them all up. Hopefully, I don't want these to come off just yet. I want to take them off manually. So, just so I don't lose washers, anything that could be underneath there, things like that. That's how you get the plate off. We'll get to the plate. I'll show you once I get that removed, and then you can see how I do all the order of this. Alright, so let's get to taking this clutch plate off. Already got most of the bolts removed, real simple. Another reason why I like this version of oil pan, gives you a place to put some bolts, things like that. All the bolts are the same size. Your springs appear to be the same. So I'm just going to take those off. That's what gives it its spring action. Set those aside. Plate should go ahead and start to wiggle off here. There's a bearing on this plate for the input shaft or the clutch pivot shaft. Inspect that, make sure it rolls really well, lubed up. If you need to press a new one in, go down to your dealer, get one. Put that on a clean surface. Try to keep it as clean as possible. Now this is your clutch that's just going to slide in and out. It's just a bolt. Take it out, inspect it, make sure it's not worn, grooved, anything like that. I'm not going to replace this nut here, do anything with that. Again, I've got a timing chain in the back. I've got a timing tensioner here. Check, make sure that doesn't look like it could be slapping around. Things like that, just double check all your gears. We will have to clean the face of this casting up on the motor side to get rid of all the old gasket. And to make sure we put it back on, that gives us a clean surface. So again, I'm going to take plate number one, which is a friction plate. The friction plate appears to be offset from the rest. So that's key so far. So friction plate, you see these little things, it's a hump, divot, hump, divot, hump, divot. They go down in the divot part. So you're going to take off the friction ring. You're going to see the plates, they're pretty brown. So far it doesn't look like a lot of wearing. The plate itself, the first friction plate or steel plate, that's extremely brown, discolored, so that tells me it's been slipping, it's been burning for a while. Again, I'm going to slap it down or lay it down in the same direction. Now this particular friction plate or clutch plate, so to speak, pretty dry actually, it's kind of weird. So it doesn't probably need a lot of oil, but it goes to the end, not the divot, but the hump. That's where it locks into place. So I'm going to take it off slowly because I want to make sure that I track that. And again, that's why it's good for you guys to do your own videos. You're doing this. So it appears, again, your steel plate, a little bit of burning there, comes down. This friction plate, I'm using a little hook. The friction plate goes into the bumps, so it locks into the bumps. Feels like a friction or steel plate's coming with it, no big deal. Can't get the friction or the steel plates wrong. Again, this all goes to the bumps itself. I'm gonna take this, get it here slowly towards me to where I can get it with my fingers. Goes back here pretty far. The whole thing's gonna come out, which is no problem at all. So steel plates you can't get wrong because they go to these inner teeth. All your inner plates, they go to these humps, and I'm gonna make sure that there's no more plates on here. But your outer plate towards that cover, it goes to that divot there. So watch that and be careful in how you line that up, because again, you don't want to line this up any differently. This plate looks pretty burned. The outer plates look to be a little more discolored than the inner plates. Maybe that's where it gets the most friction. Now I gotta get another hook here. Get another hook, get it behind here, start popping that bad boy off to where I can get it with my fingers, because again, I want to make sure that everything's there. So that's it. So it looks like you're gonna go friction plate, steel plate, friction plate, alternate all the way till you get to the outside. And the last friction plate, it turns and goes in there. It does not go into the same. Now inside here, I can see I've got some gunk, which is basically plate wear from the pads that's caused that. I'm gonna clean that up. I'm also gonna just double check this wheel here. It's a neutral, but make sure that it's got good play, it's not too loose, things like that, and there's no cracks, anything in there that could be causing any grief. I don't see anything, so at this point, I'm just gonna clean it up, start my reassembly, and start putting this thing back together for us. All right, so I think on the screen you can see where I've got everything soaking in oil. I'm gonna dip my steel plates in there as well, just so that I don't go in dry. They seem to be coated a little bit, probably to keep them from rusting. You notice there's some little divots on there now. That could be to cause some extra friction. Could also be to retain some oil in those divots as well. Not sure what the need is there, but I just wanted to show that as well so you guys can see. I'm gonna drop these in there so I can coat them with oil. As I put them in, we'll start the reassembly here once I get that clutch basket cleaned up. All right, so we're gonna get to the clutch basket reassembly. Hopefully you guys can see this. And I will show you the worn clutch here after I'm done, because I don't want to get my clutch plates out of order. So that, remember, tip it around. So we go clutch plate, which makes sense because you've got, man, I gotta get these rubber gloves. Make sure these rubber gloves, you don't get a piece stuck back there. Makes sense because the back side of this is a friction. It's part of this basket here, so it is like a steel plate. So separate a steel plate, it goes in, just grabs onto those teeth, rotate it around till it fits in. I don't know if they're keyed. Yep, so it just slides in like that. So now my plate is out of the way. Look at my clutch, and boy, it's thin. She's thin. So now we're going with a single clutch plate, friction plate, with the pads on it. If I get it wrong, you know what I'm doing. You figure it out. Goes into the high parts, goes in. Make sure when you're doing this, again, you don't get your glove caught in it, but you're separating and you're looking one plate at a time. So again, here's a steel plate going in, goes in. So get my steel plate out of the way. Looking at another clutch plate, friction plate with pads on it. Single, nothing spectacular about it. Goes in. Ready for a steel plate. Let's see if I remember to call them steel plate, friction plate. So steel plate single, slide right in. friction plate. Make sure it's turned the right way. Slides in. Steel plate. Slides in. Friction plate. Steel plate. I know this is long, guys, but I'm gonna record it in case anybody gets screwed up. You can go back and look at this. Steel or friction plate. So friction plate. Almost to the end here. Plate, friction. Steel plate. Last friction plate. Remember, these little tits here have to go on the outside or the indents. It's the only one that does that. So you got to turn it just a little bit from where you turn others. That probably just locks it all together. Don't know why. My biggest concern is I just do it the right way. Spent motor oil. You can see these plates. They're brown. They're used. These are burnt. They've got burnt marks in them. They're not, you know, they just weren't going to work. I'm going to retain the order of them just in case I ever had to go back. Put them face down in my oil because I'm not using the oil for anything except for I'll put it into a dead tree that I need to get rid of. So that's the new clutch. We're going to put the basket back on, the cover back on. Gently just put it in place. This SRK kit came with new springs. I'm going to put the new springs on. I'm going to put the bolts on, and then I'm going to torque them down. I want to say it's like 84 foot-pounds of torque on that. I'm going to check that spec here in a little bit. When I do it, I'll let you guys know. But that's the clutch reassembly. I'm going to get everything bolted up here, tightened up, and we'll be ready to start putting this thing together. Alright, so we're putting springs back in. Important to note is you're taking out 5 springs. They may give you 6 springs, and the reason they say may is one engine set for packaging purposes. This kit may include 1 or more springs than required. Discard extras. That'd be this spring right here, this little 15% stronger spring. So that don't throw you off. Mine was the lucky kit that had the extra spring. Woohoo me. I'll play the lottery later. Now, you put these springs in. There is no direction of them that I can see. They look the same. They just go over top of the clutch basket. There's a little indent in there for it to go. Good luck. You're not going to get these started by hand. The way that I've been getting them started, I don't like doing this, is putting them in a torque wrench, centering them up because you can see them, and then slowly just go at them until they start catching. It's the only way I could get them to catch. It's probably the only way you're going to get them to catch. Now I'm going to run these down by hand in a star pattern. I am not going to use a torque wrench because it can get away from you. Next thing you know, you're tightening that thing down too tight. I'm just going to snug it up. I'm not even going to bottom it out because all I'm doing is just looking to get this basket in play. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Bolt pattern, or star pattern, remember? You're just going to go into this because it's a lot like a rim, folks. You get this thing sideways and cocked in the wrong direction, then all of a sudden you're screwing up your plates and everything out in the beginning. So I'm just going to keep going into a rotation here and till we're bottom out. and then I will torque them down to the right specs. Oh, did you hear that? That just snapped into place. So it was caught on something. So that's not a good thing, something you don't want to experience, but that's under pressure. So if there's anything, like those plates are cockeyed a little bit, it may snap into place. Don't be alarmed by it. Just scares the hell out of you that you did something wrong. More than likely, if I had this in there and I didn't have that slack in there that just caused that loud pop, I would have been able to get these bolts started by hand. No big deal. That's why you go in a star pattern. I'm here to teach you guys so you learn from any mistake that I make, so hopefully I don't break my shit in the process, but keeps you guys from screwing anything up in your process. Can't guarantee I did a perfect bolt pattern because I got talking here and stopped and things like that. But again, just a couple screws on it. This is all delicate material. These are thin plates, so you don't have to go fast. You don't want to go and tighten one down, then tighten the other down. Take your time on it, because you're compressing those plates together now. They could have had gaps in them, burrs, anything that would have kept them from going down all the way. That's all getting straightened out right here. That pop you heard is a lot like a rim. Rim goes sideways. You go put it in through the star bolt pattern and it starts to get into play. Notice how I'm holding on my ratchet there. That one bottomed out. I'm holding on my ratchet. Bottomed out. But I'm holding my ratchet at the tip here, so I cannot put any pressure on it. They went down relatively the same. Down. I'm going to go over them one more time. Down, 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 down. Clutch basket is reassembled. We will be torquing this down. I'm going to find out the torque specs here in just a little bit. I'll review that and tell you how to do that next. We want this thing not to go sideways. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Go back over for measure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When you're using a torque wrench, I like to hold the head of the torque wrench and keep it solid, so that way you're not going at it and putting it in a weird bind. You want that to be as straight as possible and a consistent, slow effort. Because you can't get to the point where you can over tighten that because you haven't gone quick enough for the snap to happen in the torque wrench. So you got to keep that in mind of what you're doing there. So that basket is torqued down. I'm going to go through, clean up the old gasket, get it as clean as I can on the surface, and then we will start the reassembly process. Alright, so I went ahead and cleaned up the casting side of the motor. As you can see, it is a bright, shiny aluminum now. There's a couple methods to doing that. You can use a whiz wheel and a medium grit or a fine grit. You'd even use a paper wheel. Go slow, smooth. This thing will take down metal. It will chew, absolutely chew through aluminum, and you don't want that. So just go around it lightly, because I mean, you know, like I said, barely doing any. Where you can't get to, go ahead and scrape with whatever method you feel comfortable with. A knife, a blade, a screwdriver. Just don't gouge into this, because you don't want any point of failure for water to leak or oil to leak. When you're done, you're going to have debris from your removing the old gasket. There's just no way of getting around that. You could spray that out if you wanted. You could air blow it out. I air blow it, and then I take a rag and just kind of clean it up, and then take a rag and clean through here. Now you're gonna have to do the same thing on your cover side, so you have to clean that off as well. Get it prepared. Again, just make sure there's no chunks in here. You know, may not be a bad idea. Put all this back together, run it for a few hundred miles, make sure the clutch is right, change out the oil. refilter, re-oil, everything. Or do this before the beginning of riding season, before you do your major oil change. That way you can make sure you have no debris in between these clutch plates and nothing on these gears or anything like that. So that's what it is. Everything is good. I mean, this is in place. You know, I could probably try to push it in if I wanted to. Those are tightened up, basket's done, gasket's cleaned. I'm going to clean the derby side as well, get it ready. There are some little tips right here so you can hang your cover back on to get it lined up and to keep the gasket in place. Thank goodness they did that. You can take a needle nose, pull those out. There's one on top, there's one on the front bottom. You're going to pull those out with needle nose. That way you can clean around them, make sure you get no gunk in between those. And it helps make sure that your gasket surface is as clean as possible. Just push them in by thumb is all they require to go in. So that's pretty much prep on this engine. We will start to get the basket cleaned up and start putting the basket on. Alright, so we have the gasket here. When you go to put the gasket on, loop it around the back side of this basket so you don't get caught on these nubs putting it in. You have 2 points that'll hold the gasket on. That'll get the gasket pretty lined up. Doesn't mean that it's not going to flop forward, things like that. You can put oil on the back of that if you really wanted to hold it in place. This is what the cover looks like when it is cleaned up and all the old gasket material is removed. Again, it's shiny. So now we're at the point just rechecking everything, making sure everything's bolted up, and start to put this cover on. It's going to be a little bit tricky because we got to get the cover on at the same time. We got to get this in the right position to where it pulls the clutch out the way it should, and get this top tube in there at the same time. Again, put silicone on there, and that'll allow you to not screw up your tube. This side, the long side, is going to go down into this part, and then you're just going to slide the gasket straight on and get it back, the cover, and get it in this part as well. Aligning this up. I've got 2 people here to help me in case we have to line it up and move it, but we'll get into that process next. Alright, so putting this plate on, or this cover on, is a little tricky. You're going to guide this up there, lube up your connections so you don't screw up your O-rings. Put this into place. You've got the 2 pin catches, I believe, here and here. Kind of pound that cover back in. The tricky part is aligning up this clutch assembly, this lever arm. The way I did it is it went all the way to the rear of the vehicle. I went ahead and put my clutch cable in, and as I kind of tapped that cover on, I pushed this around towards pointing towards the driver's side, left side of the bike. And then I tightened my cable up. I checked everything to make sure. I'm not going to take it off to show anybody because I think I got lucky and got it the first time. But if you go to pull this clutch and you adjust it out and there's nothing but sloppy play with no spring, then you probably didn't get it caught on that rod that pushes the clutch in and out for disengagement. Now to test this, I'm going to bolt the cover back in place. We're going to put it in gear and try to spin the rear tire, make sure that we can't. Then we know that the clutch is engaged. And then I'll have somebody pull the clutch lever and then see if we can spin the tire and see if it disengages. Because what you don't want to do is assume that you got it correct before you start assembling everything up, or you start the bike only to realize you left it in gear and you have no way of getting the clutch in. So we're going to start the reassembly of the cover now. Alright, so I have the bolts in place. I just hand tighten them up. We are going to torque them down according to that, 43 foot-pounds. I'll go at 45, just easier being all numbers. When I do that, I'm going to go in as much of a star pattern as I can, because again, we don't want this cover to go on cockeyed and give us some problems there. I did have to take the clutch cable back out of this so I could get to the 1 bolt here, which is no big deal, and then I'll put it back in place, and again, then we'll do the wheel test just to make sure we didn't lock the clutch up. So we are going to go into a star pattern next to get the clutch cover plate cover back in place. Alright, so it called for 47 foot-inch-pounds of torque on this. Now, if you've heard me say foot-pounds, think of it in inch-pounds. So 47 on each of these bolts in a star pattern. I went to 50 because 3 isn't going to matter much, and it's easier for me to see. Started with this bolt, drop down this bolt, and just keep doing that till you get into a star pattern. Don't forget about your 2 bolts in the center. When you're done, go right in order so you don't lose any one of them at all, and just go back through one, make sure it just clicks, everything's tight, and everything's in there. My tube is in, so that should be good. I'm going to get my clutch cable put back in. Once that's done, we can start getting the rest of the bike put back together and how we need to. All right, so we got our clutch cable put back into place here at the bottom. Put it in, tightened up, 2 12mm nuts on there. Basically the one towards the back of the bike locks this cable into this bracket. I put it back in the clutch lever, and then that adjustment screw there, I just came out a little bit. This is where you're going to do your main adjustment on the clutch. You can kind of go by hand until it gets a little bit tough to turn. That'll take all your slack out of it. This is where you really should adjust your clutches. Clutch adjustment is right here. I'm going to run that out a little bit, and then I will check to see what it's like. Because you want 1 to 2 millimeters play up there at the lever. And once you get that, then you know you're good. You can lock that jam nut down. Need a little more. And you're just going to back basically this bottom screw out of the big long nut. Let's check where we're at. Alright, I'm going to give a little too tight, so we're just going to run it in a little bit, test what we've got, and then we'll lock that jam nut down. And that will keep that from slipping. And make sure the clutch is working as it should. Got my 1 to 2 millimeter play, feeling good spring action, so I think we're in good shape. We'll lock that down, then we're going to do the wheel test to make sure the clutch engages and disengages before we button the bike up and or start the motor. Alright, so next we're going to start with our bar. Our cover's in place. I've got the lower tube on for my radiator. I'm going to just get this plug up out of the way, because we don't want to damage that plug, because I'm sure plugs aren't cheap at all. So the next thing what I'm going to do is, this is our starter wire, I believe. I'm going to go ahead and get it back into place, get it clamped up, and that way it's done. So that's in place. Just pull it out away from the motor a little bit. That holds it into place. Now we're going to put the bar in. When we go to put the bar in, then we'll get the rest. Then we'll start with the brake assembly after that, I believe. I'll probably do the breather last, because that was designed to come off without any of this stuff being in the way. So it'll be the bar, it will actually be the exhaust, and then the brake assembly. So yeah, that's the right order. Bar, exhaust, and then brake assembly. Get it in place. And then we'll start filling it back up with coolant, with oil, and further test the bike. Again, I'm going to leave it in the rear tire in the up position so that I can fully test the clutch. Because if you goofed up the clutch and you go to start it and it engages in gear, that bike's moving forward. So always start it with the rear wheel up to make sure you're safe, stay out of the way, make sure everything's clear so it doesn't get wrapped around the wheel, fling it into you, things like that. Alright, so getting ready to put this tube on, the frame tube. Got my bolts out, 2, 2, 2. We're going to put it in place. If I ever forget to tell you, every single bolt you put back into this bike gets Loctited. I think I said that earlier. Just going to use some blue Loctite on each bolt as you put it back in. I'm going to start with the top one here, get it into place, get it started by hand, not by doing it with a mechanical means. And get that bolt goes out. That's right, I put it in place. So that'll go on the front there. Bolt in the back. Sorry, I don't like losing my bolts. So now the bolts are out. It should go back into place here relatively easy. And manipulate how to go there. You gotta figure out how it goes back on, and once you do, it'll all slide back into place. I think it goes just like that. There you go. Alright, again, hand tighten it. We're going to thread lock a back one and put it in first to give you a little thread lock for yours. I'll put mine in first. So again, every bolt gets thread locked on these bikes. Medium grade, don't use the red permanent, you'll never get it back off. And then you're going to be hating life. So those two bolts are started. We're going to get these in, and then we'll get the bolts started as well. So again, two here, one back here by the tube for the downside of the radiator, and then there's a small bolt here just to hold the radiator in. We're going to get those done. I'm sure there's torques on that, but this tube, it's supposed to be pretty damn tight, so I'm just going to torque it pretty damn tight. Alright, so we got the exhaust bolted up. The way I did it again is I did not take them off this bracket so they stayed in a line. Wasn't bad, but it didn't fit up there like butter, don't get me wrong. We had to manhandle a little bit. Put one bolt in the back bracket right here. That held the exhaust generally in place. Then we started up here because it's the longest tube. Allows us more flexibility, and just started those two acorn nuts. And then went back here. I had to tap this exhaust on a little bit and this bracket down to get it to where I could start those nuts. Then I just went ahead and torqued these down. Again, I'm not going through torque specs. I get into torque specs when it comes to moving parts. I just tighten this up appropriately and tighten those up appropriately. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 back here, and then there's another bolt here that, if you remember, I used the handy dandy little ratcheting wrench. Tighten them up 12 millimeters all the way across. Again, if you have an aftermarket exhaust that's not like this, it may be different. So that takes care of the exhaust. I'm not going to put the shields on because we are going to do a test drive of this vehicle. We'll do the shields in a little bit. So at this point, we are ready to start putting our brake assembly back in place and then getting it going. And then the last thing I'm going to do is put that breather back on. So we'll move to the brake assembly next. Alright, so brake caliper setup's ready to go back in, that caliper, booster and all that. Got my switch back in, got this spring hooked back up. I'm going to remove these bolts here, and then we'll just 2 bolts on this, and that completes your brake assembly, which is pretty bad, not a bad design there. So get these long bolts out. God, I know they're this long. Take the tension off of that front bolt, and we will line them up, get our thread locker on them. Make sure that your brake line is up out of the way. Everything else is not getting jammed up in any way at all. And then we'll start our first bolt here in the back. Get it in place. Start our second bolt in the front. Started? Yep. Alright. So when we go to tighten this up, we want to make sure all the lines are out of the way, nothing's in the way. Remember, there's these clips down here at the bottom of the rail that we took off. I'm going to go ahead and clip that up into place now. And that will get the brake line secured going to the back brake. I took off 4. If you took off 4, you're going to have 4 to redo. That's in place, that's out of the way. Our wire harness is free, and we'll get it back together and then bolt that piece on. I'm going to go ahead and tighten this up, bolt this on, and we should be good. Alright, so we got our brake setup in place. 2 bolts here, tightened it up, made sure our wire harness on the switch was not bound up. The brake line going to the back of the brakes isn't bound up. Got our reservoir in place. So technically, besides covers, breather, we're done with this side. So what I'm going to do now, go ahead and put the fluid back in for the oil, the fluid back in for the radiator, and then that way we can get this thing underway for a test fire, see how it runs. Obviously I'll put the breather on next because that's a spark arrestor. You don't want it to backfire and cause any grief blowing yourself up. Alright, so we've got all the components tied together. On this side, did a scrub check, make sure everything's done. The only thing left is breather, rear foot peg. He is putting 4 quarts of oil in it, 3.5, 4 quarts. We're not changing the filter. It was changed less than 100 miles ago. When we change the oil, it may be soon, just to get rid of any debris that would have fallen down into here and clean it up a little bit. I believe to put coolant in this, what we're going to have to do to be able to fill this up correctly to get all the air bubbles out is to fill it from the top of the neck. I'm going to slide this gas tank back and expose where we can fill this up, and then we'll have all the fluid topped off, the radiator fluid. We'll run a little bit, check at the reservoir, which is on the right hand or left hand side of the bike under a cover, and we'll fill the rest from there once we get the bike going. All right, so I put the breather on. Remember, there's a bottom hose that goes on here. I put that on first. Then I plugged it in. There's a plug, and then the last one I'm putting on is the hose on top. There's a little clamp on it. We'll get it into place. Put it on. And that'll get that sealed. Again, it's just an air line, so it's not like it needs a great seal or anything like that. Make sure it plugs into place. 5 Allen bolts here. 2 go in the center here. Remember, they didn't have these in there. I'm going to put them in. Looks to be about a 10 millimeter to drive those in, but we're going to put these in as well. They could have rattled out. Maybe they didn't put Loctite on them. None of these bolts had Loctite on it. Again, you're dealing with the motorcycle vibrations with these twin cylinders. They vibrate a lot, so you're going to definitely need to use your Loctite on it. So we'll get a 10 millimeter, drive those in. That'll get the air breather on. He's got the oil on. Then we'll go over adding the fluid next. All right, so get our coolant in. 2 bolts come out of the back, I believe 12 millimeter. You can get to the lid for the coolant fill neck here. Push the gas tank back. I just propped it up on this side a little bit with a knee pad. And then I'm going to use this filler or funnel to put it in there. That way we can get it at the right angle just to get in there, because I'm not taking this gas tank off. It's just the less you take off, the less problems you have. So we'll get it filled up next and top it off. Okay, so that's what we want. So what we demoed there is we went ahead and started the bike with the clutch in. Notice the wheel is off the ground. So we put it in neutral, started the bike. I saw that the wheel wasn't moving, things like that. He went ahead, pulled the clutch, put it in first gear. And of course the wheel's gonna spin a little bit because there's some pressure on there. And I was able to put the brake on full and stop the rear wheel without the bike stalling out. That means the clutch is engaged or disengaged, engaged however, but it's not allowing the pressure to be put on the back wheel. So that proved that our clutch is working. Then what I had was him to let the clutch go, so now the bike is in drive mode. I put the brake on and you saw the bike stall out. So that tells me the clutch is engaging to where it's trying to drive the bike. That is a test you have to do when you do anything with the clutch, because had we started this and then went to put it in first gear, and if we didn't get this clutch adjustment correctly, the bike could have lunged forward off of the stand, caused damage, hurt one of us, something like that. Or even if you had it off the stand and you're getting ready to pre-test it, you would put it in gear, all of a sudden it lunges forward because it's like the clutch isn't there. So that's a good test when you're doing anything with the clutch to make sure you're going to be safe. So the only thing we have to do now is it was successful putting radiator fluid in here. We're going to put the rest in the reservoir back there. I put these 2 bolts on. I'm going to put the cover on. We're going to get these covers back over the exhaust, and then we'll put this foot peg on, and that is all you have to do for a clutch on a 2012 Vulcan Classic 900.